When I purchased my home in Oak Ridge Estates last spring, I was drawn by the mature trees, the spacious backyards, and the quiet streets perfect for evening walks. The house itself needed work, peeling paint, outdated kitchen, and a backyard that resembled more wilderness than suburban oasis. But I saw potential, a place where my family could put down roots and create memories. The property survey the previous owner included showed generous boundaries, especially in the back, where nearly half an acre stretched behind the house. The first few weeks passed in a blur of boxes and renovation plans. Neighbors stopped by with welcome baskets and introductions. Everyone seemed friendly, offering recommendations for local services and inviting us to block parties. Everyone except Karen Thompson from next door. Karen lived in the immaculate white colonial house on our eastern boundary. Her lawn looked like it had been trimmed with scissors rather than a mower. Her flower beds bloomed in perfect symmetry, not a petal out of place. Her windows gleamed in the sunlight, not a streak or smudge to be found. And from those windows I often caught glimpses of her watching me, binoculars occasionally making an appearance when she thought I would not notice. Our first interaction happened when I parked my truck slightly over the invisible line where our driveways met. She did not ring the doorbell. Instead, she stood in her yard and loudly discussed with her husband how some people have no consideration for property lines. Message received. I moved my truck. By the third month, I had repainted the house, updated the kitchen, and turned my attention to the backyard. The previous fence separating our properties was a disaster, warped boards, missing sections, and what appeared to be termite damage along the bottom rails. It needed to go, not just for aesthetics, but for safety. I hired Bennett Construction, a well-reviewed local company, to remove the old fence and install a new cedar privacy fence along the exact same line. The morning the contractors arrived, I was in the kitchen pouring coffee when I spotted movement through the window. Karen was speed-walking across her pristine lawn, her arms rigid at her sides, her face set in grim determination. By the time I stepped outside, she was already interrogating Mike Bennett about permits and property lines. "Excuse me, but what exactly do you think you are doing?" Her voice carried that particular tone that somehow managed to be both saccharine and venomous simultaneously. "Good morning, Karen," I said, extending a hand she pointedly ignored. "We are replacing the old fence. It is practically falling down." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "That fence has been there for 20 years. It is a boundary marker. You cannot just remove it without consulting me first." "Actually, I can. The survey shows it is entirely on my property, about 8 inches from the actual property line." I pulled the folded survey from my back pocket, a document I had started carrying specifically for this moment. She snatched it from my hands, her acrylic nails clicking against the paper as she unfolded it. "This must be incorrect. My husband and I have always maintained that the fence line is the property line." Mike Bennett cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we verified with the county records this morning. The survey is accurate." Karen thrust the paper back at me. "I have lived here for 15 years. I know where my property ends. That fence is on my land, and I forbid you to touch it." I took a deep breath, determined to remain calm. "Karen, I understand this is surprising, but the documentation is clear. The fence is on my property, and I have every right to replace it." Her face flushed red. "We will see about that." She spun on her heels, stalking back toward her house. Over her shoulder, she called, "I suggest you halt construction until this is resolved." Mike raised an eyebrow at me. "Want us to wait?" "No," I replied firmly. "We have the permits and the survey. Please proceed as planned." As the crew began removing the first rotted panel, I watched Karen through her living room window. She was on the phone, gesticulating wildly, her face twisted with indignation. I knew this was far from over. What I did not know was that I had just ignited a suburban war that would escalate beyond anything I could have imagined. That evening, as the construction crew packed up for the day, several support posts had been installed along the newly established fence line. Karen stood at her kitchen window the entire time, photographing every move with her phone. As twilight fell, she emerged from her house and walked along the exposed property line, measuring distances with exaggerated movements, clearly performing for my benefit. "You are making a big mistake," she called over to me as I watered my newly planted garden beds. "I know people in this neighborhood, important people." I nodded politely but said nothing. Her threats were transparent. She was used to intimidating neighbors into compliance. But I had done my research, followed the rules, and had documentation on my side. What harm could she possibly do? As I would soon discover, when someone like Karen feels their territory is threatened, there are no limits to how far they will go to reassert control. This was not just about offense. It was about dominance, and she was prepared to use every weapon in her arsenal to win. 3 days after construction began, the fence posts were in place, and the crew had started attaching the horizontal supports. I had chosen a 6-foot cedar privacy fence, something that would age gracefully and provide security without looking imposing. The morning was quiet, birds chirping from the old oak tree, the rhythmic sound of hammers in the background as I prepared for a day of remote work from my home office. The sound of tires on gravel cut through the peaceful morning. Through my office window, I watched a sheriff department cruiser pull into my driveway, followed immediately by a second one. My stomach dropped as 2 uniformed deputies stepped out, adjusting their hats against the morning sun. Behind them, partially obscured but unmistakable in her pink tracksuit, stood Karen, arms crossed in triumphant anticipation. I closed my laptop and walked outside, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. I knew I had done nothing wrong, yet the presence of law enforcement on my property sent a wave of anxiety through me. "Good morning, officers. How can I help you?" I kept my voice level professional. The taller deputy stepped forward. His nameplate read Rodriguez. "Morning, sir. We received a complaint about illegal construction and property line disputes. Mind if we take a look at your permits?" "Not at all." I motioned for them to follow me to the patio table where I had prepared a folder containing all relevant documents, a decision that now seemed prescient. "Here is the building permit from the county, the HOA approval letter, and the property survey conducted last year before I purchased the home." Deputy Rodriguez reviewed the papers methodically while his partner observed the construction area. Karen hovered at the edge of my property, neck craned to hear our conversation, her face a mask of righteous indignation. "According to the complaint," Deputy Rodriguez continued, "you are building on land that belongs to your neighbor. She claims this constitutes trespassing and destruction of property." Before I could respond, Karen strode forward, inserting herself into the conversation. "That fence has marked the boundary between properties for decades. He cannot just decide to move it wherever he wants. I have photographs from when we moved in 15 years ago showing the original placement." The second deputy, a younger man with Jenkins on his badge, glanced between Karen and me. "Ma'am, we will need to see those photographs if you have them." Karen fumbled with her phone. "Well, I do not have them with me right now, but I can get them. The point is, he is stealing my land." Her voice rose dramatically, carrying across the yard where several neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the unusual sight of police cruisers. Deputy Rodriguez finished reviewing my documents. "Sir, according to this survey, the fence line is indeed within your property boundaries, about 8 inches from the actual property line, in fact." "That is impossible," Karen nearly shouted. "My husband paid good money for that fence installation years ago. We would never have built it on his property." I cleared my throat. "Actually, I believe the previous owner installed the fence, not you. According to county records, it was permitted in 1998, well before you moved here." Karen's eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously. "You have been investigating me." "No, I researched the history of my own property before beginning renovations. It is standard due diligence." Deputy Rodriguez handed me back my paperwork. "Everything appears to be in order, sir. You have the proper permits and the survey clearly shows you are building within your own property line." He turned to Karen. "Ma'am, unless you have a more recent survey that contradicts this one, there does not appear to be any violation occurring here." Karen's face flushed crimson. "So you are just going to take his side, without even investigating properly? I want to speak to your supervisor immediately." Deputy Jenkins stepped forward. "Ma'am, we are not taking sides. We are simply following the documentation. If you have contrary evidence, we encourage you to present it. Otherwise, this appears to be a civil matter, not a criminal one." "This is outrageous." Karen's voice had reached a pitch that caused several birds to flee from nearby trees. "He is destroying my property while you stand there and do nothing." Deputy Rodriguez's expression remained professional but cooled noticeably. "Ma'am, I should warn you that filing false reports is itself a punishable offense. If you continue to call emergency services without legitimate cause, There could be consequences. This warning only seemed to inflame Karen further. Are you threatening me now? For trying to protect my property, I pay your salary with my tax dollars. Several neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle exchanged glances. I caught Mrs. Patel from across the street rolling her eyes, while Mr. Johnson from 2 doors down shook his head in what appeared to be familiar exasperation. Deputy Rodriguez turned back to me. Sir, you are free to continue your construction as planned. However, I would recommend documenting everything carefully. If this dispute escalates, you will want evidence of compliance with all regulations. I understand. Thank you, officers. As the deputies walked back to their cruisers, Karen followed them, her voice rising and falling in theatrical waves of outrage. This is not over. My lawyer will be contacting your department. This is an abuse of power. I know the county commissioner personally. When the cruisers finally pulled away, Karen turned to face me. The small audience of neighbors made no move to disperse, clearly invested in the unfolding drama. Karen seemed to suddenly realize she had witnesses and straightened her posture, attempting to regain composure. I am calling my lawyer right now, she declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. You will be receiving a cease and desist letter by the end of the day. I suggest you halt construction immediately if you do not want to face significant legal consequences. Without waiting for my response, she pivoted and marched back to her house, phone already pressed to her ear. The gathered neighbors gradually drifted away, a few offering me sympathetic glances or subtle head shakes that seemed to say, "Welcome to life next door to Karen." The construction crew, who had diplomatically paused their work during the confrontation, approached me cautiously. Want us to continue? Mike Bennett asked quietly. Absolutely, I replied. We have the law on our side. Let us not let intimidation tactics derail a perfectly legitimate project. As they returned to work, I noticed Mrs. Patel approaching from across the street. She was a retired teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for nearly 20 years. I see you have met the Neighborhood Welcome Committee, she said with gentle sarcasm. Is she always like this? I asked. Mrs. Patel smiled sadly. Oh, this is actually quite restrained for Karen. You might want to invest in security cameras. Things tend to happen when she feels challenged. With that cryptic warning, she patted my arm and returned to her house, leaving me to wonder just what kind of neighborhood battle I had unknowingly entered. The fence that was meant to create peaceful boundaries had instead declared war. The next 2 weeks brought a new understanding of psychological warfare. Karen's cease and desist letter never materialized, likely because no lawyer would take such a dubious case. But her campaign of harassment intensified in ways both petty and increasingly disturbing. It began with noise. Each morning as the construction crew arrived, Karen would position a Bluetooth speaker directly at the property line and blast talk radio at a volume that bordered on painful. When city noise ordinances forced her to turn it down during work hours, she switched to late night and early morning disruptions instead. Car alarms that mysteriously went off at 5:00 a.m., garbage cans loudly dragged across driveways before dawn, and what sounded suspiciously like furniture rearrangement in the middle of the night. Then came the trash, not scattered litter that could be blamed on wind or animals, but carefully positioned debris just over the property line on my side. Fast food wrappers, empty garden soil bags, and once most disturbingly, a pile of dog waste that appeared too strategic to be accidental. Taking Mrs. Patel's advice to heart, I installed a comprehensive security camera system that covered every angle of my property. The cameras were visible but not ostentatious, small black domes mounted under the eaves, their presence a quiet statement that I was documenting everything. The construction continued despite the distractions. The fence was nearly 3/4 complete, the fresh cedar creating a warm, natural barrier that already improved the backyard dramatically. Each completed section seemed to infuriate Karen more, as if every board was a personal affront to her authority. Notes began appearing, tucked under my windshield wiper, taped to my mailbox, even slipped through my mail slot. Each one typed, unsigned, but unmistakably from Karen. Neighborhood eyesore, paint peeling on north side of house. Violation of HOA aesthetics policy. Garbage bins left at curb 30 minutes past collection time. Second violation. Unregistered construction work observed on Sundays. Noise ordinance violation will be reported. I collected each note, dated them, and added them to a growing file labeled Karen. I did not respond or confront her, which seemed to only escalate her frustration. The HOA president, Mr. Castillo, a retired attorney with silver hair and a perpetually tired expression, called me one evening. "I have received 17 separate complaints from Mrs. Thompson in the past week," he said without preamble. "Everything from improper lawn care to unauthorized architectural changes." "Are any of them valid?" I asked. He sighed heavily. "Not particularly, but she is threatening to call an emergency HOA meeting if I do not address them formally. I wanted to warn you before sending the standard violation notice. It is just procedure, nothing to worry about." "I appreciate the heads up, Mr. Castillo. Just so you know, I have been documenting her behavior as well." There was a pause on the line. "Smart man, keep doing that." The fence was nearly complete when the security system sent an alert to my phone at 2:17 a.m. Motion detected in the backyard. I tapped the notification, expecting to see a raccoon or neighborhood cat wandering through. Instead, the night vision camera clearly showed a human figure creeping along the newly constructed fence line. It was Karen, dressed entirely in black, carrying what appeared to be a measuring tape and several wooden stakes with bright orange flagging tape attached. I watched in disbelief as she methodically placed the stakes along my side of the property, each one about a foot away from the fence. She worked with the confidence of someone who believed they were entirely justified, pausing occasionally to make notes on a small pad. I saved the footage immediately, then continued watching as she completed her task and slipped back through a gap in the shrubs to her own yard. The entire trespass had taken less than 15 minutes. The next morning, I checked the backyard and found exactly what the video had shown: a line of orange-flagged stakes creating a new border that would claim about 2 feet of my property along the entire fence line. Had I not had the video evidence, it would have appeared that these markers had always been there, predating the fence construction. Rather than removing them, I left the stakes in place and waited until precisely 9:00 a.m. before walking next door and ringing Karen's doorbell. She answered wearing her gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed hat, as if she had been innocently tending her immaculate flower beds all morning. "Good morning, Karen," I said pleasantly. "I was wondering if you might know anything about the surveyor stakes that appeared in my yard overnight." Her expression never faltered. "Surveyor stakes? I have no idea what you are talking about." "Orange-flagged wooden stakes, placed in a straight line about a foot inside my property from the fence, approximately where you were walking at 2:17 this morning." A flicker of something, surprise, anger, perhaps even fear, crossed her face, but her composure quickly returned. "Are you accusing me of trespassing? That is a serious allegation." "Not an allegation, Karen. I have video footage of you placing those stakes in my yard during the night. That constitutes criminal trespass in this state." Her eyes narrowed. "Your cameras are pointed at my property? That is an invasion of my privacy. I will be speaking to my attorney about this." "The cameras are pointed exclusively at my property, which is where you were walking last night. Would you like me to show you the footage before or after I take it to the sheriff's department?" Color drained from her face, but the defiance in her eyes remained. "Those stakes mark the historical property line. I was simply restoring markers that your construction crew removed." "Karen, we both know that is not true. I have the original survey and the county records. What you did last night was not only trespassing but also attempted property fraud." She pulled off her gardening gloves with sharp, angry movements. "You newcomers think you can just move in and change everything without respecting the neighborhood's history. That fence line has been established for decades." "The property lines were established long before either of us lived here, Karen. They are legally recorded and binding. Now, I have been patient with the noise, the trash, and the harassment, but criminal trespass crosses a line I cannot ignore." "Are you threatening me?" Her voice rose sharply. "No, I am informing you of my next steps. I will be filing a police report today with the video evidence. What happens after that is up to the sheriff's department." I turned and walked away as she launched into a tirade about neighborhood values and respect for long-term residents. Her voice followed me across the lawn, but I did not look back. This had gone far beyond a neighborhood dispute. It was time for official intervention. At the sheriff's department, Deputy Rodriguez recognized me immediately. He reviewed the footage on my phone, his expression growing increasingly serious as he watched Karen placing the stakes. "This is clear criminal trespass," he confirmed, "and potentially attempted property fraud, though that would be harder to prove intent." He looked up from the screen. "Do you want to press charges?" I considered the question carefully. I want this documented officially, and I want her to know there are real consequences to her actions, but mostly I just want her to stop. Deputy Rodriguez nodded. "Let us start with the official report and a formal warning. If the behavior continues, we can escalate to charges." As I filled out the paperwork detailing the incidents of harassment leading up to the trespass, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and regret. I had never wanted conflict with my neighbors, quite the opposite. But sometimes standing your ground is necessary, not just for yourself, but for everyone who might become a target after you. By the time I arrived home, word had already spread through the neighborhood grapevine. Mrs. Patel waved from across the street, giving me a thumbs up. Mr. Johnson slowed his car as he drove past, nodding in apparent approval. And Karen's house remained silent, curtains drawn tight against prying eyes, her garden left untended for the first time since I had moved in. The balance of power had shifted. But as I would soon discover, Karen was not one to surrender territory without one final, desperate counterattack. The certified letter arrived exactly 4 days after I filed the police report. The return address showed the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, the official letterhead crisp and authoritative. Inside was a formal violation notice citing unauthorized structural modifications inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetic guidelines. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Karen had escalated her campaign to the one bureaucratic entity that struck fear into the hearts of homeowners everywhere, the almighty HOA. According to the notice, I was required to attend the next board meeting to address the violations or face potential fines. I called Mr. Castillo immediately. "I thought you said the complaints were invalid." "They were," he sighed, sounding even more exhausted than during our previous conversation. "But Karen submitted a formal petition signed by 3 board members demanding a hearing. I was outvoted. Politics," he added ruefully. "Which board members?" I asked. "The Andersons and Mrs. Whitfield." The names meant nothing to me, but the implication was clear. Karen had allies on the board, people who either believed her version of events or owed her favors. "What exactly am I being accused of?" I asked. "Technically, changing the historic character of the neighborhood with fence design that disrupts visual continuity. It is nonsense, of course, but procedures must be followed." The HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening in the community center. I spent the weekend preparing, gathering photographs documenting the fence construction process, organizing permits and approvals, and most importantly, creating a concise presentation of Karen's escalating harassment, culminating in the trespassing incident. Word of the impending HOA showdown spread through the neighborhood with remarkable speed. On Monday morning, I found Mrs. Patel waiting by my mailbox. "We heard about the meeting," she said without preamble. "Many of us will be there." "To support Karen?" I asked, my heart sinking. Mrs. Patel laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "Oh my goodness, no, to finally say what many of us have wanted to say for years. Karen has terrorized this neighborhood long enough." "I do not want to start some kind of revolt," I said cautiously. "You are not starting anything. You are just the catalyst," she patted my arm. "Sometimes a community needs someone willing to stand up first." Tuesday evening arrived with unexpected tension in the air. The community center parking lot was fuller than I had anticipated, with residents continuing to stream in as I gathered my documents and headed inside. The meeting room, typically half empty for regular HOA proceedings according to Mr. Castillo, was packed to capacity. Karen sat in the front row, a thick binder on her lap, her posture rigid with anticipation. Beside her sat an older couple and a thin woman with steel-gray hair whom I assumed were the Andersons and Mrs. Whitfield. They leaned toward Karen occasionally, nodding at whatever she whispered. Mr. Castillo called the meeting to order, his gavel barely audible over the murmur of the assembled residents. After dispensing with regular business with remarkable efficiency, he cleared his throat. "Next on the agenda is the violation complaint against the property at 1542 Oak Ridge Lane, regarding fence construction. The board will hear from both parties before making a determination. Karen stood immediately, clutching her binder like a shield. As the aggrieved party, I believe I should present first. Mr. Castillo nodded wearily. You have 5 minutes, Mrs. Thompson. What followed was a masterclass in theatrical victimhood. Karen's voice trembled with emotion as she described the desecration of neighborhood character, the blatant disregard for established boundaries, and the emotional distress caused by having to witness the destruction of historical property markers. She presented photographs of the neighborhood from years past, pointing out the consistent fence line that had defined our community identity for generations. Furthermore, she continued, her voice rising dramatically, I have been subjected to harassment, invasion of privacy through unauthorized surveillance, and defamation of character through false police reports. From the back of the room came a poorly suppressed snort of disbelief. Karen turned, scanning the crowd with narrowed eyes before continuing. I am not just fighting for my property rights, but for the integrity of our entire community. Today it is my boundary being violated. Tomorrow it could be yours. She pointed at random audience members for emphasis. As her allotted time expired, she presented her final evidence, a printed copy of HOA bylaws with highlighted sections about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics and respecting established structural boundaries. Mr. Castillo thanked her with diplomatic neutrality and then nodded to me. You may present your response. I approached the front of the room with my own documentation, but without Karen's dramatic flair. Thank you for the opportunity to address these concerns. I will be brief and factual. I displayed the property survey, the county records confirming boundary lines, and the properly obtained permits. As you can see, the fence is being constructed entirely within my property boundaries, approximately 8 inches from the actual property line. This has been verified by county officials and law enforcement. Then I moved to the next phase, Karen's escalation. I showed photographs of the strategically placed trash, copies of the harassing notes, and timestamps of noise disturbances. I concluded with the security footage showing Karen trespassing on my property to place the fake boundary stakes. I have filed a police report regarding the trespass, but have not pressed charges at this time. My goal has never been conflict, but simply to improve my property within my legal rights. Before I could return to my seat, a hand shot up from the middle of the room. Mr. Castillo hesitated, then nodded to acknowledge the question. I am Robert Chen from 1567 Oak Ridge, said a middle-aged man in a polo shirt. I would like to add that Mrs. Thompson called animal control on my daughter's therapy cat last summer, claiming it was a feral nuisance. The cat never leaves our screened porch. Another hand. Elizabeth Jordan, 1522. Karen reported my grandson's basketball hoop as an unauthorized recreational structure 3 times last year. He has cerebral palsy, and his physical therapist recommended the activity. Suddenly, hands were rising throughout the room. Mr. Castillo attempted to restore order, but the floodgates had opened. Resident after resident stood to recount their own experiences with Karen's campaigns of control, everything from reported violations over holiday decorations to complaints about medical equipment deliveries disrupting neighborhood tranquility. Karen's face transitioned from shock to outrage to something approaching panic as the testimonials continued. Her allies on the board shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact with the room. Finally, Mrs. Patel rose slowly from her chair. The room fell silent in deference to her age and respected position as a founding neighborhood resident. I have lived in Oak Ridge Estates for 22 years, she said, her voice gentle but clear. In that time, I have watched as our community spirit has been eroded by fear of reprisal from self-appointed authorities. Karen is not defending neighborhood character. She is enforcing her personal preferences through intimidation. It is time we reclaimed our community. Applause broke out, starting softly but growing in intensity until Mr. Castillo was forced to use his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Karen stood abruptly. This is a coordinated attack on my character. I have only ever tried to maintain standards that benefit everyone's property values. Mr. Castillo raised his hand for silence. The board has heard sufficient testimony. We will deliberate briefly and render a decision. The board members huddled at their table, speaking in hushed tones that occasionally rose when Mrs. Whitfield seemed to object forcefully to whatever consensus was forming. After several minutes, they returned to their seats, and Mr. Castillo cleared his throat. Regarding the violation complaint against 1542 Oak Ridge Lane, the board finds no evidence of bylaw infractions. The fence construction is properly permitted within property boundaries and consistent with acceptable design standards. The complaint is dismissed. A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Additionally, Mr. Castillo continued, the board wishes to remind all residents that filing unsubstantiated complaints constitutes a misuse of HOA resources. Future complaints must be accompanied by objective evidence of actual violations. Karen gathered her materials with jerky, angry movements. This is a disgrace. You will be hearing from my attorney, all of you. She swept her gaze across the room before storming toward the exit. As the meeting officially adjourned, residents approached me with handshakes, sympathetic pats on the shoulder, and invitations to neighborhood gatherings I had never known existed. It seemed that in standing up to Karen, I had inadvertently become a symbol of resistance against years of petty tyranny. Mr. Castillo caught me as I prepared to leave. You handled that well, he said quietly, but be careful, she will not take this public humiliation lightly. What more can she do? I asked. The law is on my side, the HOA is on my side, even the neighbors are on my side. He shook his head. People like Karen do not operate by normal rules of engagement. When they are cornered, they become unpredictable. His warning echoed in my mind as I drove home, watching Karen's silhouette moving behind her living room curtains as I passed her house. I had won this battle decisively, but something told me the war was far from over. The aftermath of the HOA meeting brought an unexpected period of calm. Karen retreated into her home, curtains drawn and lights dimmed, a self-imposed exile from the neighborhood she had once ruled with imperious authority. Construction on my fence continued without incident, the final sections coming together to create the secure, attractive boundary I had envisioned months earlier. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance now stopped to chat when they saw me outside. Weekend cookouts materialized spontaneously, block parties were planned, and a genuine sense of community began to emerge from Karen's shadow. I found myself, somewhat reluctantly, cast as the neighborhood hero, the David who had stood up to Goliath and somehow prevailed. Do not get too comfortable, Mrs. Patel warned me over iced tea one afternoon. I have watched Karen regroup before. This quiet is not surrender, it is strategic retreat. I wanted to dismiss her concerns as paranoia born from years of neighborhood trauma, but the security cameras remained active, silently watching over my property day and night. The fence was now complete, stained a warm cedar tone that complemented the house and created a peaceful backdrop for my growing garden. Only one small section remained unfinished, a decorative gate that would provide access to the utility easement at the rear of the property. 3 weeks after the HOA showdown, on a Saturday afternoon bright with early summer sunshine, I was installing that final gate when my phone vibrated with a security alert. Motion detected, backyard north corner. I frowned, puzzled by the notification. I was already in the backyard. Was the system malfunctioning? I pulled up the camera feed and felt a chill despite the warm day. The north corner camera showed Karen, dressed in dark clothing despite the heat, slipping through a gap in the neighbor's hedges and onto my property. In her hand was what appeared to be a hammer or mallet. I remained motionless, watching through my phone as she approached the newly completed fence section. Her movements were furtive but purposeful, glancing repeatedly over her shoulder as she positioned herself near a support post. With calculated precision, she placed the hammer against the post and began to work the wood loose, using the claw end to pry apart the carefully assembled structure. Anger flooded through me, hot and immediate. After everything, the documentation, the police reports, the public exposure of her behavior, she was still determined to destroy what was rightfully mine. I set down my tools and walked quietly around the perimeter of the yard, approaching her from behind. Karen, I said calmly, what exactly do you think you are doing? She whirled around, the hammer clutched defensively. Her eyes were wide with surprise but hardened instantly into defiance. This post is on my property. I am reclaiming what is mine. We both know that is not true. I held up my phone. And once again, I have you on camera trespassing and now damaging my property. This is criminal behavior, Karen. Your cameras are an invasion of privacy, she hissed, but the hammer lowered slightly. They are on my property, recording my property, which you are currently trespassing on. This has gone far enough. I pulled up the sheriff's department in my contacts. I am calling Deputy Rodriguez right now. This time I will be pressing charges. You would not dare, she said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. I maintained eye contact as I made the call, briefly explaining the situation to the dispatcher. Karen's expression cycled through anger, disbelief, and finally, a dawning realization that she had crossed a line from which there would be no easy retreat. They are sending a deputy immediately, I said as I ended the call. I suggest you wait here rather than adding fleeing the scene to your charges. This is ridiculous, she sputtered. I was simply inspecting the fence construction. I never touched anything. I nodded toward the camera. The video shows otherwise, Karen. You were actively damaging my fence with that hammer. I pointed to the tool still clutched in her hand. She glanced down as if surprised to find it there, then quickly tossed it aside. That is for my gardening. I was examining the fence because it appears to be leaning into my yard. The sound of an approaching siren cut through her excuses. Within minutes, a sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway and Deputy Rodriguez emerged, adjusting his hat as he walked toward the backyard. He surveyed the scene with practiced efficiency, Karen standing rigidly by the fence, the discarded hammer on the ground, me holding my phone with the incriminating video queued up. Recognition flashed in his eyes when he saw Karen. Mrs. Thompson, he nodded, we meet again. This is harassment, Karen declared immediately. He lured me onto his property and is now falsely accusing me of vandalism. Deputy Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, let us start with why you are on his property at all. He turned to me. Sir, you mentioned you have video evidence. I handed him my phone. The security system sent an alert. The footage shows her entering my property through the neighbor's hedge and using that hammer to damage the fence post. The deputy watched the video carefully, his expression growing increasingly serious. Karen shifted her weight nervously from foot to foot. I need to examine the fence, Deputy Rodriguez said when the video ended. He walked over to the section Karen had been working on, crouching to inspect the damage. Fresh gouges marked the wood where she had been prying at the post, chips of cedar scattered on the ground beneath. Mrs. Thompson, he said as he straightened up, can you explain what you were doing here? I told you already, I was inspecting the fence. It appears to be encroaching on my property. With a hammer, the deputy's tone remained professional but skeptical. I use it for gardening. Ma'am, we have been through this property line dispute before. The county records clearly show that this fence is entirely within his property boundaries. And now, I have video evidence of you trespassing and damaging private property. Karen's face flushed. He has been harassing me for months with these false claims. Ask anyone in the neighborhood. I am a respected community member who has lived here for 15 years. Deputy Rodriguez sighed. Mrs. Thompson, at this point, I have no choice but to issue you a citation for criminal trespass and property damage. You will need to appear in court to address these charges. He pulled out his citation book and began writing. The color drained from Karen's face as the reality of her situation sank in. A citation? That will go on my record. I have never had so much as a parking ticket. You should have thought about that before entering someone else's property without permission and damaging their fence, the deputy replied evenly. Sir, do you wish to press charges formally? I considered the question. Part of me wanted justice, wanted Karen to face real consequences for months of harassment and intimidation. But another part just wanted peace, wanted this exhausting conflict to finally end. Yes, I said firmly. I do. This has gone on long enough. Karen's eyes widened in shock. You cannot be serious. Over a fence, this will ruin my reputation. Your actions have consequences, Karen, I said quietly, just like everyone else's. Deputy Rodriguez finished writing the citation and held it out to Karen. Mrs. Thompson, this citation requires you to appear in district court next Tuesday at 9 a.m. Failure to appear will result in additional charges. You are also officially being warned not to set foot on this property again without explicit permission from the owner. Any further incidents will result in immediate arrest. Karen's hand trembled as she took the paper. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the pleasant temperature. "This is not over," she whispered, but the threat lacked her usual conviction. "Actually, Mrs. Thompson, I strongly recommend that it is over," Deputy Rodriguez said firmly. "The court will take prior incidents into account if this pattern continues." Karen clutched the citation to her chest, her carefully constructed facade of neighborhood authority crumbling visibly. Without another word, she turned and walked stiffly toward the street, avoiding the eyes of curious neighbors who had begun to gather at the commotion. Deputy Rodriguez watched her go, then turned back to me. "I will need a formal statement from you for the report, and I would recommend keeping that video footage secure. You will need it for court." As I provided my statement, describing the history of harassment leading up to this incident, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and exhaustion. This was never what I had wanted when I moved into the neighborhood. A simple fence had somehow escalated into criminal charges and broken community ties. "You did the right thing," Deputy Rodriguez said as he prepared to leave. "People like that depend on others backing down. It is the only way the behavior ever stops." I nodded, watching as he drove away, the official report now part of the public record. The gathered neighbors dispersed slowly, some offering supportive nods or thumbs-up gestures as they returned to their homes. Karen's house remained silent, the curtains drawn tight against prying eyes. The hammer she had brought to destroy my fence lay forgotten on the grass. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, a simple tool transformed into evidence of her desperation. The lengths she had gone to maintain her illusion of control seemed both sad and alarming in retrospect. I returned to finishing the gate installation, the final piece of the project that had inadvertently exposed the fault lines running through our seemingly peaceful community. With each screw I secured, I felt a corresponding sense of my own boundaries being reinforced, not just the physical ones marked by cedar planks, but the invisible lines that determined what I would and would not accept from others. News of Karen's citation spread through the neighborhood with astonishing speed. By Sunday evening, it seemed everyone in Oak Ridge Estates knew that the self-appointed enforcer of community standards had been issued a criminal citation for trespassing and property damage. The irony was lost on no one. For the first time since I had moved in, Karen's house remained completely dark on a Monday morning. No lights in the kitchen where she typically stationed herself with coffee and binoculars to monitor neighborhood activities. No immaculately dressed figure inspecting her lawn for imperfections. Her car remained in the garage, the automatic door firmly closed against curious onlookers. Mrs. Patel joined me as I collected my mail that afternoon. "Have you heard from her since Saturday?" "Not a word," I replied, though I half expected a lawsuit by now. "She is in shock," Mrs. Patel nodded knowingly. "Her entire identity was built around being the neighborhood authority. Now everyone knows she is just a common trespasser." Common or not, Karen's absence created a palpable shift in the community's atmosphere. Children played more freely in front yards. Neighbors chatted longer at mailboxes. Even the daily dog walkers seemed to linger, enjoying conversations without the fear of being reported for some obscure violation. Tuesday morning arrived with a strange sense of anticipation. I knew Karen would be appearing in court to address her citation, but I had not been summoned to testify. The security footage and Deputy Rodriguez's report would speak for themselves at this initial hearing. Around noon, Mrs. Whitfield from the HOA board, one of Karen's former allies, stopped me as I returned from a run. "She pled guilty," Mrs. Whitfield said without preamble. "My husband works at the courthouse. Karen accepted a plea deal, guilty to trespassing, property damage charge dropped in exchange for paying restitution and staying 100 feet away from your property for 6 months." I was surprised by the swift resolution. "That is good news, I suppose." Mrs. Whitfield nodded, looking uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology. When Karen came to me about the fence complaint, she told me you were building on her property despite survey evidence. I believed her without question because she has always been so, certain about everything." "It is hard to resist that kind of confidence," I acknowledged. "Well, she is not so confident now." Mrs. Whitfield glanced toward Karen's house. "Her husband called Robert Anderson this morning. Apparently she has barely gotten out of bed since Saturday. Keeps saying her reputation is destroyed." While I felt no joy in Karen's distress, I could not manufacture sympathy for the consequences of her own actions. She had spent months, years, according to the neighbors, creating an atmosphere of fear and rigid control. The collapse of that power structure was inevitable once someone stood firm against her tactics. By Wednesday, Karen's meticulous yard began showing signs of neglect. Uncut grass, withering flowers, a sprinkler left running until water pooled on the sidewalk, the very offense she had reported 3 neighbors for last summer. Thursday brought the first sighting of Karen herself. Through my kitchen window, I glimpsed her retrieving her mail, dressed not in her usual crisp attire, but in a bathrobe and slippers despite the mid-afternoon hour. She moved quickly, eyes darting nervously as if expecting confrontation from every direction. When Mrs. Patel waved from across the street, Karen flinched visibly before hurrying back inside. "She looks terrible," Mrs. Patel reported later, "like she has not slept in days." Friday morning, a certified letter arrived from the county courthouse. Inside was a copy of the official restraining order, detailing the conditions of Karen's plea agreement. No contact with me, no coming within 100 feet of my property, and payment of $750 in restitution for damage to the fence post. That same day, Karen's husband emerged from their self-imposed isolation. An accountant by profession, Norman Thompson had always existed in Karen's shadow, a quiet, apologetic figure who seemed perpetually braced for his wife's disapproval. He approached me cautiously as I watered my front garden. "I want to apologize," he said, standing awkwardly on the sidewalk. "For everything Karen has. She has not been well for some time. This situation has been a wake-up call for both of us." I nodded, unsure how to respond. Norman had never been part of the conflict, but neither had he done anything to restrain his wife's behavior. "The restitution check will be delivered Monday," he continued, "and I want you to know we will be fully respecting the restraining order." He glanced back at his house. "Karen is seeing someone now, a therapist. This whole situation has forced her to confront some difficult truths about herself." "That is good to hear," I said sincerely. "I never wanted this conflict, Norman. I just wanted to build my fence and live peacefully." "I know that now." He hesitated, then added quietly, "She has always needed to control her environment. When things do not go exactly as she plans, she fractures a bit. It is not an excuse, just context." He walked away before I could respond, shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible burden. For the first time, I felt a flicker of compassion for Karen, not enough to forgive the months of harassment, but enough to recognize that her behavior might stem from deeper issues than simple malice. The weekend brought a neighborhood block party, the first in over 3 years according to Mrs. Patel. Karen always found reasons to deny the permits, she explained as she helped set up folding tables on the community green. Too much noise, potential property damage, traffic concerns. Eventually people stopped trying. Nearly every household participated, a celebration not just of summer but of reclaimed community spirit. Children played freely on the grass while adults grilled and shared potluck dishes. Music played from portable speakers, and impromptu dance circles formed as the afternoon stretched into evening. From my vantage point by the dessert table, I could see Karen and Norman's house, curtains drawn tight against the sounds of laughter and conversation. They were the only residents not in attendance. Mr. Castillo approached, paper plate of food in hand. "Quite a transformation in just a few weeks," he observed. "I never meant to create such a division," I admitted. "You did not create it," he corrected gently. "You simply exposed what was already there." He nodded toward the far side of the green where several children were playing an elaborate game of tag. "Jenny Morris over there with the red hat. Her mother wanted to throw her a 10th birthday party last year, bounce house in the backyard, a few streamers. Karen threatened to call the police over noise ordinance violations if they went through with it. They canceled the party." "That is horrible." "It was normal here," Mr. Castillo sighed, "until you came along with your fence and your documentation and your quiet insistence on your rights. You gave everyone else permission to stand up too." As twilight deepened into evening, I walked home along streets lit by porch lights and the warm glow of living room windows. My new fence stood solid and familiar now, the cedar beginning to weather into a soft silver gray that blended harmoniously with the landscape. What had begun as a simple home improvement project had somehow catalyzed a neighborhood revolution. Passing Karen's house, I noticed a small light in an upstairs window, a reading lamp, perhaps, or a television screen casting blue shadows. I wondered what she was thinking as the sounds of community celebration drifted through the summer air. Was she plotting new strategies of control, or finally confronting the loneliness that her behavior had created? I did not slow my pace as I continued past her property. The restraining order worked both ways. She was required to stay away from me, and I had no desire to engage with her again. Whatever journey she was on now, it was separate from mine. My backyard welcomed me with the scent of fresh cedar and the quiet privacy that had been my original goal. The fence stood complete, solid, and uncompromising in the fading light. It marked more than just a property line now. It symbolized a boundary between the community that had been and the one that was emerging in its place. I sat on my patio, listening to the distant sounds of neighbors saying goodnight, car doors closing, children being called inside. The neighborhood was healing, finding its voice again after years of enforced silence. And I had somehow found my place within it, not as the newcomer to be tested and taught how things work here, but as a catalyst for positive change. The security cameras still monitored the perimeter, but their presence felt less urgent now. Karen had retreated, defeated not just by legal consequences, but by the collective awakening of a community she had once controlled through fear and intimidation. Her power had always been an illusion, sustained by the reluctance of others to challenge it. All it had taken was one person willing to stand firm on principle, and a fence that marked where her authority truly ended. The restitution check arrived on Monday morning as promised, accompanied by a formal letter from Norman apologizing for the damage and affirming their commitment to respecting the restraining order. The signature at the bottom was his alone, Karen's name conspicuously absent from this official acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Over the next few weeks, a new normal settled over Oak Ridge Estates. Karen's presence, once so dominant in daily neighborhood life, faded to occasional glimpses through windows or brief sightings as she hurried to and from her car. Her yard, previously maintained with military precision, gradually surrendered to nature's more relaxed aesthetic, grass growing longer between mowings, flower beds showing occasional weeds, leaves accumulating in corners of the porch. Norman emerged more frequently, exchanging cautious greetings with neighbors, even joining the men's poker night that Mr. Johnson had revived after a 3-year hiatus. In these small ways, the Thompson household began reintegrating into community life, albeit with Karen remaining a shadowy, peripheral figure. My fence project, the inadvertent catalyst for so much change, was finally complete. The last section of damaged post had been replaced, the gate installed and functioning smoothly, the entire structure stained and sealed against the elements. What had begun as a simple property improvement had evolved into something far more significant, a physical manifestation of boundaries, both literal and metaphorical. 6 weeks after Karen's court appearance, I decided it was time to properly enjoy the space I had fought so hard to define. I planned a small backyard gathering, nothing elaborate, just a few neighbors who had supported me through the ordeal, good food, and the satisfaction of relaxing in a space truly my own. Mrs. Patel was the first to arrive, bearing a homemade curry that filled the air with fragrant spices. The Chens brought wine and stories of their own past conflicts with Karen. Mr. Castillo contributed both a fruit platter and his dry legal wit, recounting HOA horror stories that somehow seemed amusing now that the tension had lifted. As twilight approached, I lit the string lights I had installed along the fence perimeter, transforming the backyard into a warm, inviting space. The cedar planks glowed amber in the gentle illumination, no longer just a boundary but a backdrop for community and connection. "A toast," Mr. Castillo proposed, raising his glass, "to fences that make good neighbors." "And to neighbors who respect those fences," Mrs. Patel added with a knowing smile. Laughter rippled through the gathering, not mean-spirited but relieved, the shared recognition of a community emerging from a long shadow. Through the ambient conversation and clinking glasses, I occasionally caught myself glancing toward Karen's house, visible through the slats of the fence that had caused so much conflict. Her kitchen light was on, a solitary lamp illuminating a figure seated at the table. Even from this distance, I could recognize Karen's rigid posture, her face turned toward my yard. Was she watching our gathering, listening to the sounds of conversation and laughter floating over the fence she had tried so desperately to prevent? I found I no longer cared. Whatever emotions she experienced, anger, regret, envy, or perhaps even reflection, they were her own to process. My energy was better spent engaging with the neighbors who had chosen connection over control, who understood that community thrives on mutual respect rather than fear. As the evening progressed, the conversation turned to neighborhood improvements now possible in the post-Karen era. Mr. Chen suggested reviving the community garden that had been abandoned years ago after Karen reported it for unsightly vegetation. Mrs. Whitfield, once Karen's ally but now cautiously rebuilding relationships, proposed a children's play area on the currently underutilized community green. It is amazing what becomes possible when people stop being afraid to suggest things, Mrs. Patel observed. Around 9 o'clock, as we gathered around the fire pit I had installed near the back of the yard, the distinctive sound of a sheriff's cruiser caught everyone's attention. Deputy Rodriguez was making his evening patrol through the neighborhood, a routine check that had become more frequent since the incidents with Karen. He slowed as he passed my house, the cruiser's headlights sweeping across the front yard. Through the fence slats, I could see him pause, then offer a deliberate nod of acknowledgement before continuing down the street. That simple gesture, professional but unmistakably supportive, symbolized how thoroughly the dynamics had shifted. The law had sided with reason and documentation over intimidation and false authority. Order had been restored, not through Karen's rigid control, but through the proper channels of property rights and legal boundaries. "You know," Mr. Castillo said quietly beside me, "in 20 years on the HOA board, I have never seen one person make such a positive impact in such a short time." "I just wanted to build a fence," I replied with a smile. "Sometimes the smallest actions reveal the largest truths." He gestured toward the gathering of neighbors, relaxed and engaged in animated conversation. "Look at this. 6 months ago, half these people would have avoided being seen together for fear of what Karen might say or do. Now they are planning a community garden." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, each leaving with leftovers and promises to continue the conversation started here, I found myself alone in the backyard. The string lights cast a gentle glow over the space I had defended so determinedly. In the center stood the patio table where I had first shown Deputy Rodriguez my property survey, the document that had given me the confidence to stand firm in the face of Karen's intimidation. I walked the perimeter of the fence, running my hand along the smooth cedar planks. Each section represented a stage in this unexpected journey, from simple home improvement to neighborhood revolution. The repaired post where Karen had attempted her final act of defiance now stood stronger than before, reinforced both physically and symbolically. At the corner nearest Karen's property, I paused. The light in her kitchen had gone out sometime during the evening. Her house stood dark and silent, closed off from the community that was reawakening around it. I felt no animosity toward her now, only a calm certainty that boundaries, once clearly established, had the power to transform relationships. The restraining order would expire in a few months. What would happen then? Would Karen emerge from her self-imposed exile, chastened and perhaps ready to engage differently with her neighbors? Or would she cling to resentment, finding new ways to assert control over smaller and smaller domains? It was not my problem to solve. My responsibility had been to stand firm on principle, to defend what was rightfully mine without escalating unnecessarily. I had done that. The rest was up to Karen, and to a community now confident enough to maintain its own healthy boundaries. As I turned to go inside, a movement caught my eye. Norman stood on their back porch, quietly watering a small potted plant. A simple domestic task he was now apparently free to perform without supervision or criticism. He glanced up, saw me watching, and after a moment's hesitation, raised his hand in a tentative wave. I returned the gesture without hesitation. Whatever happened next, this neighborhood had changed forever. The invisible walls that had divided us were coming down, one interaction at a time. Inside my house, I moved from room to room, turning off lights, the pleasant fatigue of hosting settling into my bones. Through the kitchen window, I could see the fence outlined in moonlight, solid and reassuring. It had never been about keeping people out, but about defining a space where I could invite them in on my own terms. Tomorrow I would clean up the remnants of the gathering, perhaps plant those tomatoes Mrs. Patel had suggested would thrive along the sunny side of the fence. Maybe I would even join the committee forming to revitalize the community garden. Small acts of growth and connection, possible now in the space created by standing firm against intimidation. The fence that had started it all was now simply part of the landscape, its purpose fulfilled. Not just to mark a boundary, but to remind us all that good fences, and the courage to defend them, really do make good neighbors.